This episode is sponsored by Aura. I built what might be the world's weirdest, most over-engineered Nerf blaster. It's got 21 magnets, 10 sensors, 8 springs, 7 motors, 5 feet of aluminum tubing, 4 switches, 3 drivers, 2 CPUs, and an ammo counter that stares into your very soul. When I pull the trigger, the revolving bolt grabs a dart from one of 5 built-in tube magazines and spins it into position so it can fire through this extended barrel. To reload, you just open the safety shield and start shoving in darts. The system automatically knows where to put each one, and it'll even turn a dart around if you insert it backwards. It's 2.5 feet long, it's inscribed in Enochian, and it is covered in unnerving, unblinking eyes, just like the horrifying Old Testament angels that inspired its name. Ladies, gentlemen, and cyborgs, my name is Zack Freedman, and this is my biblically accurate blaster of blasphemy, the Ophanim. Be not afraid. Unless data brokers are selling your family's personal information.
Sponsor plug.
This episode is sponsored by Aura, your defense grid against the sleazy scumbags who sell your home address, phone number, and even the ages of your children to anyone who cares to buy them. It is a messed up industry, but it's a messed up $250 billion industry, and you're the product. Even if you've never revealed this info, data brokers can still get their hands on it. They scrape every public profile on every social media site, they slurp up voting and purchase records, and they straight up buy your private info from companies you thought you could trust. Did you know the hookup app Grindr sold enough user data to triangulate some members' exact positions? They allegedly secretly and illegally sold personal info to 135 advertisers in blatant disregard of the GDPR, and their punishment was a measly 10 million euro. Our personal info has already been sold, resold, and stashed in so many places it's effectively impossible to scrub. But Aura can do the next best thing, render it impossible to buy and sell. Many countries, including the US and member states of the EU, require brokers to purge a specific person's data if they file the right paperwork. Aura automates this process across the entire industry and then checks back again and again in case your data mysteriously reappeared in another data set they bought from another broker. You might think you got nothing to hide, so prove it. Get a 14-day free trial by visiting aura.com/ZackFriedman or by clicking the link in the description. See what brokers have on you and learn how Aura can get it off the internet. Now let's return to the biggest thing I have ever made from scratch. The Ophanim is far and away the physically largest, most technically ambitious project I've ever even started. And it's not even fair to call it a project. It began as an experiment that just kept failing to fail. As much as I want to call it a labor of love, that would be bullshit. This was a labor of spite. If you dug through my back catalog, you might have reached the bottom of the barrel. The EOX Metabreaker, my very first fully edited video. I stuffed a Nerf Rapid Strike with 2 OLED displays, NFC cards encoded with different firing modes, and a gratuitously overbuilt motor driver with the biggest capacitors you've ever seen. Unless you do railguns or something, those are some big f***ing capacitors. That video was 4 minutes of straight up dog shit, but the project itself really struck a chord. A Smart Blaster was a spicy meatball back in 2017, but for all the bells and whistles I added, my mods didn't really make the Rapid Strike any better or even significantly different. I briefly worked on a sequel that would more extensively overhaul the blaster, but a few months into that, Captain Slug dropped the Caliburn and kicked off a 3D printed arms race that immediately made most modded toys obsolete. I figured battery-powered blasters would soon get the same treatment. Well, now it's 2025, and electric nerfing has barely discovered the transistor. Pushers are now solenoids, magazines are now talons, and flywheels are now brushless, but apart from the numbers, today's battery-powered blasters work basically identically to this piece of shit I bought at Target almost 10 years ago. The world does not need yet another Roblox looking ass SMG that has a pusher that strip starts off a stick mag that goes into a flywheel. There are plenty of those already. The utter stagnation of battery-powered nerfing really boils my frog, and nothing pulls the ripcord on my project obsession quite like the prospect of saying, listen here, you little shit, this is how it's fucking done. Everything changed when I became a vampire. Nerf vampires. It was there in front of me all along. Earlier this year, I did a live-action roleplay set in the Roaring 20s. I would play a vampire alchemist with Edwardian style and a briefcase of occult technology. Chicago typewriters are going to be everywhere, so one of the first props I printed way back in November was a functional, non-firing reproduction volcanic pistol. Patented in 1854, years before Abe Lincoln could fax a samurai, this lever-action handgun self-loaded a dozen striker-fired black powder powder caseless rounds. It was perfect for the character because it was simultaneously 70 years obsolete and also a century ahead of its time. I couldn't have invented a better choice. In real life, the Volcanic went down as one of the most flaccid flops in firearms history. The Volcanic is better known as being the primitive predecessor to the Winchester lever-action rifle, and that's exactly what I initially thought it was, just like a little scaled-down Winchester rifle. But it turns out the Volcanic has one crucial difference. Basically, all tube-fed weapons, whether they're lever action or pump action, put the magazine under the barrel. When you cycle the action, a little tray called the lifter or elevator lines up with the magazine, and the follower pushes a cartridge up into it. On the return stroke, the lifter tilts the round upwards so the bolt face can catch the edge of the cartridge, which slides it up and over the lifter into the chamber. It's a very elegant mechanism that is so reliable we still use it today, especially for shotguns. But it does not work for Nerf. Trying to drive a squishy rubber-tipped foam rod up a ramp, around a corner, and into a hole by poking it on the rim is more likely to smush the dart flat or straight up fold it in half. But as I built and played around with the model Volcanic, I realized its elevator is completely different. Instead of a tilting plate, the Volcanic's elevator is a sliding block with a cubby hole drilled in it. When you cycle the action, it drops straight down to line up with the magazine, then it pops right up to align with the barrel. The magazine's follower pushes the round straight into the elevator, and the bolt pushes it straight into the chamber. Darts don't bend when you push them head on, so this could, hypothetically, work with Nerf darts. Hypothetically, if I made the block spin instead of slide, I would be able to motorize it. Hypotheses can be tested. This was not a good thing. I have ADHD, and that means I can't always choose what to focus on, or what to stop focusing on. Unlike actual discipline, pathological obsession only drives me to do stuff I already want to do, so eventually I will run out of fun tasks, and all that's left on the to-do list is the shitty tasks. The project dies, wasting hundreds of hours of work because I can't make myself finish the endless series of shitty tasks required to finish it. I'm sure nobody can relate to this. The most effective way for me to cut my losses would be to just build the mechanism, technically just try to build the mechanism. That'll completely break my motivation, and I will ditch the project forever, too ashamed to even look at it again. Totally unique, singular experiences that nobody else has ever had. So I opened Fusion, no longer 360, and I roughed out the part most likely to fail. You know, the thing. I built a revolving cylinder, a spring-loaded gate to keep the darts in place, and some magazines. I added a pair of magazines because it seemed cool and it made the experiment more likely to fail. The cylinder's turntable and loading slot were first-class features, so I mocked those up too. I want to point out I did not need to do this to prove the concept. This was a bad decision. I was having a very hard time avoiding the fun tasks. I printed it up, I slapped it together, and I prepared for disappointment. It worked. Now, it didn't work great. Like, darts slipped over the gate, they got mangled by the turntable, and the cylinder would pinch the tips till they looked like cigarette butts. But the core concept was not debunked. In fact, in some ways it worked better than I expected. Both magazines could feed darts, and there was no reason I couldn't add more. So I tried 3 mags, then 5, and that turned out to be the magic number. Spread out far enough to make the structure sturdy, but still close enough to leave room for flywheels. If I could fit 10 rounds in each tube, I would have 50 round capacity, which would outlast my opponent's 20 round Talon mags over 2-to-1. Since I could top off each mag 1 round at a time, I could bring like 1,000 loose darts into battle and just keep pressure on my opponents for the whole game. A 5-tube mag spinning bolt squad automatic blaster was unlike anything I had ever heard of, and it had to be electronic, and it had real gameplay value, and I hadn't proven I couldn't build it. I had expected to get stopped cold, but I was now more fired up than ever. That wasn't the only game-breakingly shitty task. I also needed to push darts off the cylinder and into the flywheels. Normally, I would use a solenoid. This is an electromagnetic coil that flicks a piston whenever you power it up. It's very simple, doesn't need any mechanisms. But even purpose-built Nerf solenoids only travel about 30 millimeters, and I needed minimum 60 to clear the turntable and loading slot. I had to go back to where it all began. Most off-the-shelf full auto blasters drive their pusher with a face cam, not the twitch kind, the 2-dimensional slot kind. A tab called a follower spins in a circle, and that rides on a track on the pusher that causes it to move in and out very predictably. Plotting the geometry of that slot is way beyond my abilities, but there's a second way to convert a spinning motor to a thrusting pusher, a half gear. This is exactly what it sounds like. A rack and pinion where the straight rack is spring-loaded and the round pinion is missing half its teeth. The round gear drives drives the straight gear till it runs out of teeth and lets go. Then a spring resets the straight gear while the round gear completes the cycle. I have never actually made custom gears before, so modeling funky gears was going to be a game ender. Except, it turns out Fusion has a simple script preloaded that just generates spur gears. I just filled in the form, got a gear, deleted half its teeth, and I was halfway there. To bring it home, I just cloned the tooth's profile and created a rectangular pattern with the same spacing as the round gear by just converting circumference to distance. It sounds like big brain math shit, but trust me, it's not. The proof is I did it and it worked. Alright, technically I miscalculated the first time and insta-killed a gearbox motor, but the second time worked. So I raised the stakes. I added a spring-loaded follower to all the mags so I could sanity check the whole system together. I've already designed Nerf mags, so I have a supply of constant force springs that are perfect for this project. Constant force means they won't squish any harder when the mag is full, and they don't push any lighter when the mag is running low. The proof of concept jammed a lot, but that's just another way of saying it sometimes worked. I was already way further than I expected, and I was getting curious. If the parts I thought were impossibly hard didn't stop me, what would? My ADHD was breaching containment, and I needed another brick wall to crash into. It's always a good idea to test new parts before you install them, so if something misbehaves, you know whose fault it is. Nobody actually does this because it's a giant pain in the ass. So that's exactly why I front-loaded it, because maybe it's tedious enough to get me to quit the project altogether. So to drive the cylinder and pusher, I found these little gearbox motors, and I immediately realized the tiny gearbox motors were too small and weak, but I could just use the bigger servos and gearbox motors I already had on hand. The turntable will be driven by a micro servo and sit over two color sensors, one to get the color of the foam, the other the color of the tip. That way, if I knew the color of the darts, I knew which way was forward. A slip ring wouldn't be a bad idea either. If the whole thing starts spinning uncontrollably, this would keep the wires from getting twisted and ripped out. So at the end of each mag, I would put a time of flight sensor. This shoots an infrared laser at the follower, times how long it takes for the light to reflect back, then divides by the speed of light in air to calculate the distance. The closer the follower, the more rounds are in the mag, and this sensor's resolution is below a millimeter, so picking up 36mm darts is no problem. It is truly incredible what you can get for $3 on Amazon. The cylinder will be covered by a sliding safety shield with a polycarbonate window. A pair of Hall magnetic sensors would detect if that were open or closed, and another Hall sensor would know if the loading gate was jammed by a dart and or a finger. A Hall sensor is just a magnet sensor. Normally at this stage, safety measures are not worth the work. A prototype only needs to survive long enough to prove something, and if you stick your finger in untested machinery, you deserve whatever happens to you. No, all these safety measures are protecting the electronics. If I prevented things from breaking, I figure I'll just speed the whole project up. To speed up debugging, I also grabbed a display to show data and diagnostics right on the blaster. I was going to need this thing for the ammo counter anyways. I found a round one, and that just felt right. This is going to be a very round blaster. Unfortunately, we are not going to use the TNC. We are going to go with the Raspberry Pi Pico and other things based on the RP2040 and RP2350. These have lots of buses on lots of pins, and we got dual cores, so we can control all this crap without gumming up the business logic. This is when I realized my strategy of smashing my face into the shittiest tasks as fast as possible had a major flaw. I had run out of fast shitty tasks, and since every element interfaces with at least one other element, I would have to model a significant amount of the blaster just to continue testing the parts. I briefly wondered what would happen if I ran out of shitty tasks altogether. No. I hate learning new things, I hate asking for help, and I hate feeling like a talentless idiot. There was one task so far beyond my skills and expertise, it would guarantee all three at once. I had to design the blaster's aesthetics. Normally, you should fully forget fit and finish till the functionality is fucking finalized. Locking in the aesthetics before I had even proved the concept was insanity. But sometimes, insanity is the smartest play. I don't need to finish the project to make a video about the project. I just need to make it look like I finished a project. You're already more than halfway through this video, so I feel safe pointing out I have never actually showed a dart leaving the muzzle. This does not mean I'm trying to deceive anyone. A Spit and Prayers benchtop demo of part of a failed Nerf blaster loading system would make the most boring thumbnail on YouTube, but if I took a detour and modeled the whole blaster, then whether or not I crashed and burned, you would get the same quality content style video entertainment experience, except I could actually convince you to watch it. Sure, if I didn't crash and burn, I'd be wasting an astronomical amount of time getting consumed by a project that I'd have to redo a significant part of, but the instant I started sketching, I knew this would be the end. I have no idea where to start. I don't do art, but I do do know someone who does. This is Alice Tyrell, aka Coat Duck, and she's created sculpted organic blasters unlike anything else you see in this hobby. I hate asking for help, but I didn't have to. Alice is one of my Warframe buddies, so before I knew it, we were clicking on heads as she dropped a double whammy of knowledge bombs. The best blasters have a silhouette so iconic it's unavoidable, and a grip so satisfying it's downright irresistible. The YouTube homepage, a Nerf battlefield, and a cartoonishly fast Robot Space Ninja third-person shooter are actually kind of similar. They're chaotic and overstimulating, and folks will only see your hard work in split-second, half-hearted glances. One single fleeting flash has to completely convey what the blaster does, what makes it different, and how hard you want to see this thing in action. Even the name should be iconic. Speaking of, I had never actually named this project. I was just calling this the Nerf Volcanic, but this idea had drifted so far from a lever-action linear lifting pistol, they were now completely different species. The centerpiece was the revolving cylinder, so I started looking for spinny words, when suddenly I had it. The word wheel in Hebrew, Ophan, plural Ophanim. Ophanim were biblical angels, the Chad biblical angel from the biblical angel meme. From the book of Ezekiel, each appeared to be a wheel intersecting a wheel, and all four rims were full of eyes all around. Self-intersecting spinner dubs are the perfect branding for a Nerf blaster with a rotating platform on a rotating cylinder. Plus, everyone loves when things are covered in eyeballs. Leave a comment telling me what your favorite thing is when it's covered in eyeballs. Mine is Nerf blasters. My first draft carved the tube mags into a brick-like motif and inscribed each one with a staring eye-shaped window that exposed the darts inside. Alice immediately shot this down. The gimmick was 5 tube mags and a revolving cylinder. This didn't look tubular, revolving, or cylindrical, so these eyes were not eye-catching. Ironic. My second draft added a tall swooping carry handle and bulked up the stock to make the whole thing an eye-like spiral centered on the cylinder. Alice told me I was still being too subtle. It did kind of sell the whole this thing spins thing, but where are the mags? Alice told me to amp it up, way up. You know, like Warframe's over-the-top prime items with ridiculously, ludicrously ornate filigree that could actually look pretty good on my blaster. The third draft extended the rail so it looks like half an eye. It carved revolver cylinder grooves into the mags and bound it all together with rings embossed with more eyes. By adding even more eyes to the rings, I could run a super long dart guide beneath the mags. It actually cuts performance, but without it, it looks a little too much like a Gatling gun. It just really sells the idea that these things are not for shooting. This thing is for shooting. What the hell do these do? You gotta click the thumbnail to find out. The piece de resistance was that circular touchscreen which now displayed an existentially terrifying, soul-piercing eyeball. Zack from the future here. Warframe's neo-baroque aesthetic was set by Mike Minky Brennan, the game's original art director and an acquaintance of Alice's. This was a deliberate homage to his work. I wasn't originally planning on mentioning this because in October of 2024, Mr. Brennan lost his life to cancer. When I wrote the script, my only complete Ophanim was the ugly, hacked-up patchwork prototype propped up behind past Zack. It just felt crass to even associate that with Minky's legacy. Instead, I chose to print my camera-ready hero copy in the ivory and gold color scheme Minky used in his original Prime weapons, as a sort of sneaky reference. But when I finally built the thing, it just looked so similar to his in-game models, I decided it did make an appropriate tribute after all. So yeah, the Ophanim is inspired by and dedicated to the memory of Minky Brennan, late designer of possibly the most wildly creative aesthetics in gaming history. I really want to tell you about the grip because I over-engineered the absolute shit out of it. Suffice to say, this is the most comfortable blaster I had ever held before I used some filthy slicer hacks to give it some texture. Also, the trigger guard looks like an eye, and that's actually functional. I have to brace the blaster in one hand while I reload with the other, and this lets me use my pointer finger to get some extra leverage. I could do a whole video about just this grip. And you know what? I'll do that. I'm gonna make a whole video just about the grip, and I'm gonna make it a Patreon exclusive. Yeah, support me on Patreon, listen to me ramble about designing a grip for a Nerf blaster for 20 minutes or so. I bring this up to illustrate, I had run out of shitty tasks and there were no more roadblocks between me and full-on hyperfixation. I instantly went all gas, no brakes, and things fucking exploded. I carved the solid block blaster into printable, assemblable chunks and then plunged into the details. I built out slots to mount components, I carved channels to run wires, and I punched holes to bolt everything together. I also added cosmetic engravings in Enochian, the so-called language of the angels that's actually a half-assed conlang used by self-described hermits. It's got a very limited vocabulary. I wanted the cylinder to say "be not afraid," but the best I could do was "abandon the fear which burns in thy heart." The muzzle translates to "it is Nerf or it is not a thing." This bit here is the closest I could get to Voidstar Lab. It says House of Creation called Path to Empty Place. I'm very proud of that. Underneath that is the word Ophanim, Caesar ciphered into Enochian characters because the language of the angels doesn't have any words to classify angels. It doesn't even have the word angel. Also, in Enochian, angels don't have pronouns. You always refer to an angel by their name. Ah shit, I used a pronoun. If you're a biblical angel and you're offended, please don't smite me, cancel me, or combine the two and smansel me. Way to go, John Dee and Edward Kelly, based post-gender 16th century Bible fanfic authors. This is just a joke. John Dee married a woman 28 years younger than him, and that is definitely not based. As for Edward Kelly, he was almost defenestrated for necromancy, but managed to scam the Holy Roman Emperor into bankrolling his lead-to-gold factory instead. He then embezzled the funds to live like a noble, meaning he simultaneously was and was not technically and literally gold-breaking. Alright, Edward Kelly was pretty fucking based. Crappily translating old memes into Hermetic Klingon was not the best use of my time, but I was lost to Project Brain. I was fucking gone. The only thing still missing was a flywheel cage to actually propel the darts, and I could steal that. One of the most important things I've learned about building projects is that when you're building a project, you don't have to build the whole fucking project. This is the Griffin, a modular blaster where every part is self-contained, perfect for copying and pasting to transplant into other projects. You already saw this blaster in my mind-blowing Prince episode, though I would forgive you if your mind was too blown to remember. The flywheel cage is arguably the most important part of a flywheel blaster, but remember, I wasn't building a blaster. I was developing a loading system, at least that's what I was still telling myself. Somehow, I still ended up producing something printable, and as the plastic started cranking, I slowly had to confront the fact that I had designed a 2.5 foot long project that took 20 hours to print and used most of a reel of filament. Objects on screen are larger than they appear. I just wondered what would happen if I assembled this thing and it sucked. I assembled the first full Ophanim, and it sucked. I forgot the battery compartment, the carry handle snapped when I carried it, the mags bent upwards, bad screw placement made 3 of 5 rings literally impossible to attach, half the internal components didn't fit, half the wires are missing channels, the other half of the wire channels were too narrow to actually fit the wires, the dart trench was so deep the dart would get wedged in there and I couldn't poke it out, the long bolts were all too short, and of course the point where the mags joined the receiver was a weak spot so flimsy I could break the entire blaster with my bare hands. Apart from that, it was great. I marked all these flaws directly on the prototype in color-coded Sharpie. Doodling notes directly onto my problems is one of the best parts of prototyping. Never forget, a prototype exists to be destroyed. Debasing your handiwork will make it easier to euthanize your metaphorical project baby when its utility expires. Just because you made it does not make it worth keeping. I did keep all of my discarded parts, but that's because I'm making a video about it. It's different when I do it. The sheer tedium and complexity of fixing all this bullshit would normally turn me off the whole project, but for some reason this time it drove me even harder. So hard, I let myself avoid a gigantic, super shitty task I really should have dealt with. Remember, I never intended to take this project any further than a disembodied mechanical unit test. I should have started over from scratch with a fresh file, but I was still convincing myself I was about to discover a reason to spike the whole project. The Fusion timeline now had almost 700 features in no sensible order with 0 parameters. They also weren't separated into components, but let's be honest, nobody does that. So every tweak took 5 minutes just to recalculate and caused a dozen bizarre model-breaking side effects that cascaded into even more changes to make, and even more bugs to squash by even more changes that needed even more waiting to reveal more bugs that needed more changes, and bashing this mess into a form I could finally fill with components took another 2 weeks and 150 versions. I want to be clear, this is not a Fusion problem, this was a Freedman problem. I should have cut my losses, I should have started from scratch, I should have done a lot of things, but I didn't realize all this time was passing. I was hyper-focused, I was out of control. But eventually, inevitably, my zombie-like ADHD trudged me to the first fully assembled, fully populated, fully ready to test Ophanim prototype. Of course, I procrastinated the hell out of actually testing it because testing is the part where you realize all the stuff you did wrong and render all the work you've done meaningless and or shameful. The little voice in the back of my head was starting to yell about money, and that was too scary to ignore. So I plugged in the LiPo pack, uploaded the firmware, and almost everything failed. Catastrophically. 3 of the magazine distance sensors wouldn't read anything. The other 2 always read 66 millimeters. The forward color sensor wouldn't sense the dart's tip. The rear one, I didn't know what the hell to do with that data. The gate and shield sensors barely registered at all. The cylinder bogged down and wouldn't turn. The turntable was agonizingly slow. Darts jammed in the mags, they got shredded in the flywheel cage, the pusher got stuck, its pinion chewed up a wire, and the motor's gearbox shattered. Both flywheel motor drivers burned out, and the fucking touchscreen running the fucking manufacturer's own fucking code wouldn't register a single fucking touch. I hadn't even fucking installed that part. Reality crashed into me and the spell suddenly broke. Disentangling this mess would require a whole fresh set of materials, weeks to refactor the Fusion document, and an eternity of swatting my way through the thickest swarm of hardware bugs I'd ever seen in a whole career of creating them. And the really funny part was, for the very first time in this entire thing, I was starting to actually believe I might actually be able to pull off my own custom blaster. None of the things that failed implied that the concept was unworkable. All of these things were caused by bad guesses. I had never taken a project so far from my comfort zone so successfully, and I knew I could take it even further. I desperately wanted to keep going, but it was time to face facts. This isn't my hobby, this is my job, and if I have to sacrifice either profits or passion, there's only one rational choice. All I had to do was reprint the shell, fudge the thumbnail and teaser shots, and write the very video you're watching at this very moment. So I grit my teeth and I made the hard call. Fuck the money. I'm finishing this project. That's right, we are swan diving into a bug-busting battle royale, systematically swapping out every faulty component, stabilizing every Fusion feature, and cracking every mind-melting challenge in hardware, software, and beyond. I know how bad my track record is for making videos I promised to make, but this time I am not fucking around. By the time you watch this video, I am already shooting it. I mean, I'm shooting the video, not the blaster, although I might also be shooting the blaster. I don't want to spoil the fun. Fuck you, Zack from the past. Quit blueballing the viewers and murder that solo cup. Die, cup. Now do it again without the cuts so viewers don't think we're full of shit. Yeah, one more time for statistical significance. Look how significant that is. I could only take this risk because our sponsors and patrons give me money before they know they're getting anything out of it. Because our sponsors and patrons free me from having to use the standard YouTube playbook and crank out semi-weekly content sludge. Each video, I thank 3 Random Lab Scientist supporters, and today's are Din Static, Fred Bean, and Cooper Digital. Our celestial collaborators include ZomboDB, Scott Reaney, The Suits Ruined Our Fun, Chuck Me Harder Baby, SXP, Schleppy the Schwagster, Gridfy.cc, The Benevolent Misanthrope, Microwave, Zachary Vulpus, and Turner Zay. I have no idea where I'm pointing. I've inscribed their names on the blaster itself in English on one side and Enochian on the other. Before you pause to check my transliteration, remember, Enochian is written right to left. Oh yeah, I did my homework. And finally, praise be to the heavenly host they call lab assistants. Like divine entities in the Zohar, their true names are too long and complex for the human tongue, so I have to abbreviate them. Thank you, Cullen, Jean-Baptiste Leonelli, Pilgrim Labs, Onyx Plague, Crash Doom, Quantumly Tangled, The Monk, Period Clots, T-Kite, Spire, Tony Guntharp, Zach Harvey, PRD, Lost Rider Socks, Trans Rights, Scroto Saggins, Nat Queen of Lemons, Big Bird Tommy, Renaud Bataille, TR Fullheart, Zapf, Aaron Steers, Sarah Clancy, Iron Rain, Reagan, Amanishi, Chardelos, Talon, Roger Pinkham, Al Finger, why didn't the filament cross the road? I was trying to avoid a cookie catastrophe. Last warning, Nate. Michael Creamer Jr., Viwatch, Zach, William T., Brunwolf Schulte, Raccoons in a Trench Coat, Dan Ryan, The Snow Cow Cabal, Diners, Drive-Ins, and Deny, Defend, Depose, Cameron Ogletree, The Q01, Robo Key Mao, Jeffrey Haas, Callsign Carrot, Craft Computing, Alex Perron, Haley Kerman, Water Heater, not Walter Heater. It's a water heater. It's not someone whose first name is Walter and last name is Heater, although that would be pretty funny. Burn Duck 3, DBD, Good Suck, Dale Bibby, Kathy and Brent, No Disassemble, Max Luck, Dr. Mrs. the Muirman, Styx, Stormby, Cameron McPherson, Kevin Hildebrand, Chris Floofy Kitsune, Timor, Anti-Tux, Right to Repair, Grurg, Doom Crew Inc., Agent Maxwell, Shane Frederick, Powerful CCH, Nuclear 314, Bill Moore, Bob Dobbington, Mike Kelly, Brad Cox, Danny Devoid, Igor Box, King Shaming Walrus, Travis Pocky, Moonkin, Paul Gibbs, Reynold Hughes, Hughes, Evan Kinney, Protagonist, SKL, Lydia K, R. McKeel Ralston, Blammo, Michael, Acalia, Trans Rights or Human Rights, Acorn, The Orbital Mechanic, John Zobrist, Kevin DeGraff, Marcy Lovell, The Krolster, Cody, Rusty Flute, Clayton Easley, Sir Squeaky McLongname, Ryrob, RTB, Not Princess Michael, Travis Hippa, Des Baldonado, Partial Eclipse, Daniel Morgan, Kermit the OG Frog, Sunburnt Cat, Jack Moran, Slippy McToof, The Last Unicorn, Ergay, Dennis Kempen, Eddie, Robert Breeze, Tactical Possum, Cliff Henning, Eric, Novaran, Wuhan Express, Zenforian, Comrade Spamuel, 6A6F, Robert Cox, Riordan and Urch, Bill Schooler, Martin Tithonium, Tevin, VK2KTJ, and Joseph Ribka. You go Joseph Ribka. Finally, a special shout out to Quality Doggo, whose name I completely forgot to say last time, even though it was scrolling by. I really should start reading this thing. Thanks for watching, and every single one of these eyes will be seeing you in the future.